So I wanted to do a video because it was recently announced that CLG would be departing CSGO, meaning that a player like Finesse is just going to be out on the open market. Same case for Ricky, who's already announced he's looking for teams either in Europe or North America. And then the other three players, not really sure. We did see Cutler and Ethan and Kusta playing together in this recent CyberPower PC tournament, but not really sure if they'll stick together as a three. They were playing with Rix and Exotic coming from the CLG Academy team, which was also let go alongside the main squad. Only CLG Red remains right now as far as CSGO goes for CLG. And so that's a little bit uncertain because I did see Ethan also tweeting that he was exploring his options, which I think is a wise decision. And I just thought I would kind of talk about it from a couple different perspectives. I did want to just kind of highlight CLG as an org in CSGO really quickly, and then kind of talk about what may be happening with some of the players that were most recently playing for CLG as far as their futures go within the game. And when you think about CLG and CSGO, they were actually one of the first, like non-endemic Counter-Strike orgs to really step in the North American region to pick up a team. I know it was really big news to hear that one of the League of Legends orgs like CLG were going to be coming into CSGO, and obviously shortly afterward, you did see Team Liquid kind of follow suit. They picked up a team for X Games Aspen just as CLG did, and a few other orgs kind of, started coming into CSGO because of that, even like an org like Optic coming in from the Call of Duty world. So CLG was really one of the first ones to kind of start this movement, and they announced it way back at the end of 2014 that they were interested in CSGO, and then they announced the team obviously picking up Mousespaz right before X Games Aspen. And so essentially CLG was a part of CSGO for about 3 years, and it's kind of crazy to see them leave. That will certainly hurt the market a little bit, I think, or maybe reset the market a little bit, as Ryu was saying in his stream, as one of the big players kind of stepping away. And apparently there's word that CLG will not be the only team in the North American pro region to be dropping their CSGO lineup, and so that does begin to raise some concerns and questions alongside dropping in a viewership for the pro leagues. And so this could be a bad sign of times to come for the North American CSGO scene, but we'll just have to kind of see. And, CLG is talking about their history in CSGO performance-wise as an org. Obviously, as I'm talking through this, there were several lineup changes that took place. Finesse was in and out as an in-game leader for the team, was gone for quite a while before coming back. Obviously, it started out things with Peter being the AWP, but later on bringing in JDM. Obviously, JDM and Tarek were kind of the stars for the team for a while, but both were long gone now, when you relook at the most recent CLG lineup. But, really just kind of going back, they were pretty solid within the North American scene. They were kind of rising up as Mousespaz for a little bit. They did wind up even getting top 4 at the first EPL Season 1 finals. That was back in July of 2015, but that was solely based off of like some best-of-1 wins against Keydstars and Fnatic, so they got to go straight to the semifinals in that tournament format. And they got wrecked pretty quickly by Cloud9, who were, on their, famous summer of 2015 run, and, really looking strong with, Freakazoid and Skadoodle and Shroud, and that whole lineup just really, kicking. And they also immediately kind of tanked afterwards at ESWC 2015 when they lost to Renegades and Envy in best-of-1s to go out in the groups. Only when they had was against the South African team Bravado. And they did well to qualify for ESL1 Cologne, beating teams like Elevate, Mythic, and Team Liquid, so again, kind of proving they were still good within the NA scene, but didn't do well at the main event. And they didn't really have too many high marks until 2016, really, if you're talking about like international LAN play. Obviously, always competitive within North American leagues and online tournaments and such, but when it came to offline appearances, it wasn't really much going on up until they did really well at the Game Show Global Esports Cup. That was in February of 2016, where they actually got a 4th place finish, where they were able to actually beat out Flipside Tactics in the old G2 lineup that had Existent, Scream, RPK Smiths, and Shocks. And they were actually pretty competitive in an 0-2 loss to Dignitas in the semifinals. And this was a Dignitas lineup that, remember, was really strong at the beginning of 2016, back when they had that whole Kierby and Config combo and the tactics of MSL. They were kind of innovating some stuff on Cobblestone in particular. And so they looked really good at this tournament. And, shortly thereafter, they were able to, qualify for MLG Columbus and attain legendary status in the major system at that event just, a month later, or a couple of months later. So, they were really starting to look strong here, and there was even an argument that they were one of the best North American teams at the beginning of 2016. To be fair, they kind of went downhill offline up until really the Starlighter I-League Season 3 finals, which was not that long ago. That was, early this year, where they were able to beat teams like Gambit and Immortals and have a competitive playoff match against Astralis. And that's where it looked like things were picking back up. They also looked really good at DreamHack Summer, where they were able to get wins over Fnatic and Gambit to get into the, semifinals with the first seed. Obviously, they wound up even taking a map off of SK in the semifinals. So when you're looking at these couple of events, it was like, oh, maybe they're picking up steam. Maybe they're picking things back up. This is when FNS had just joined right back for his second stint with CLG, and the talent of like Ethan and Ricky and Kusta were starting to actually, really fire on all cylinders. This is back whenever they also have Chet as the coach of the team. And so this is looking like maybe they were picking up steam again for kind of a second wind of CLG in CSGO, but really haven't done anything since then. Obviously, Chet left to go to Optic. Ryu comes in as a coach. Had the same 5, but things just really seemed to break down, and nothing really big. I mean, they came third in the last couple of America's Minors, so didn't even get a chance to qualify for the major. Obviously, they had that big struggle at DreamHack Valencia. Everyone remembers that embarrassing Diffuse situation. Also didn't really look too good at DreamHack Denver either, getting beat out by Renegades in the group stages there a couple of times. And they were okay out of a couple of events here and there, but they certainly were getting surpassed by the rest of the middle of the pack of North America. Teams like Misfits and Renegades competing in the NA region were certainly starting to look a lot better than CLG recently, and there was even a bigger gap starting to emerge between a team like CLG and the cream of the crop of North America, and teams like Cloud9 and Team Liquid. So they were really starting to slip, and it seemed like this team was going to be either in need of drastic changes to be able to find success again, or it was just going to have to be, let's nuke it and start it all over again, basically, from CLG's perspective, I'd imagine. And there's obviously more details I can go into about CLG's history in CSGO and their ups and downs and all the various roster changes, but just kind of wanted to highlight some of the high highs and the low lows that the team's really been through lately. And it certainly makes sense that changes needed to happen on this team if they were to be competitive, but it certainly was a little bit shocking to see CLG just say fuck it and just exit entirely rather than invest and try to make changes and try to be a competitive team in the region. And again, this can go back into arguments about, are you going to get a return on your investment nowadays, trying to invest a lot of money in picking up players with buyouts the way that they are, and with CLG obviously having their commitments to, the new, LCS franchise system, and obviously, again, going back to declining NA viewership with pro leagues and things like that. But nonetheless, it is the decision that was made. And after it's been made, we've been seeing a lot of comments being made, mostly from FNS's perspective, Finesse's perspective, which he did on the Peaker's Advantage podcast. I think it was episode 6. Definitely go watch that, by the way. I'll link it in the description below. It's a really great podcast with a lot of cool characters. I think it's Davey, Simphis, Finesse, Daps, and they had Amapet as the guest of the episode I'm referring to. But they've had Moses and other people on the show as well, and hopefully they'll continue doing it. It's a good show. A little bit of a side rant, but just thought I'd kind of throw that in there. And then Ryu actually brought up a stream right after the news came out, and he also did some talking from his perspective. And so there's kind of two sides of the story, and usually the truth kind of lies somewhere in the middle. But basically, kind of what you hear is that Finesse and Ryu were at odds almost from the get-go. From Ryu's perspective, apparently Finesse was kind of a static and stale caller, that there was disciplinary problems with him, being late to practice sometimes, or being too distracted sometimes, or, whatever the case may be, they were at odds with one another. From Finesse's perspective, some of the things that were disruptive were power trips from Ryu, where he was kind of making these ridiculous, expectations of, not even looking at his web browser during a boot camp, during breaks between scrims, even though he was just trying to watch a CSGO match, or, just the fact that Finesse felt like Ryu was never really his teammate, so to speak, that they were never really on the same page, that it almost felt like Ryu wanted him gone from the get-go, and, they were at odds at how they wanted to approach the game. Finesse really feeling that, the things that Chet really brought to the table that he really enjoyed, like having someone to watch demos with, having someone to give him ideas tactically, these different things weren't really there with Ryu. There were times where, he would, ask for Ryu's suggestions during a timeout, and they from his perspective, there wasn't really much suggestion going on. He even had some kind of comments that supposedly Ryu made to him that did sound a little bit rough and rude, things like when Finesse would ask for suggestions, like Ryu would say something like, oh, I guess I should just do your job for you, even though it is the coach's job to assist in strategy of the team. Again, I don't know how true all of this is. You kind of have to, again, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, but from an outside perspective, not knowing what was actually going on, at the very least, you could say that they were at odds with each other. They weren't on the same page. They weren't working together well, and so that was always going to cause friction with the leadership of the team, and that certainly could, cause for why their team was having issues and not performing really well. Ricky was apparently at odds with the team as well, from what I understand, just because, he was obviously kind of taking a sacrifice, not opping anymore, and kind of being more of a rifler on the team, and sometimes taking more like peripheral roles, which didn't really suit his play style and what he thought he could bring to the table, and what you can see that he can bring to the table when you watch their games. And he was getting frustrated because, Kusta was opping and he was so inconsistent, from listening to Finesse's talk about Kusta and from watching Kusta play, he just didn't have that confidence. There'd be times where instead of playing to win, it's almost like he would play not to lose. Like he wanted to be overly safe to not be the cause for why his team would lose a round. And almost just be too scared. He didn't have that swagger or confidence that you want an opera to have, to be willing to take that opening duel, to be willing to make a play for your team. And certainly, statistically speaking, Kusta has been all over the place throughout his career. I mean, obviously really strong back on the days of Enemy before they became Selfless, but obviously struggled on Liquid. You give him a little bit of a pass on some of that because of Simple and role conflicts there and just, issue with the chemistry of the team. But even on CLGs has its ups and downs, and he has been pretty inconsistent as a performer. Certainly there were times where he looked really strong for a few tournaments in a row, but then there'd be times where he would kind of dip off in big games, and that's really a problem when he's supposed to be your star player and he's using the gun that has the most impact on the game. So that made Ricky kind of come at odds and him want to op, and then they tried that, but apparently there were times where Ricky would be too aggressive, and so he was almost losing them rounds because he's the polar opposite of Kusta, going for too much. And so that was certainly something that caused conflict as well, apparently. Really, I felt like the only consistent performer on the team was Ethan, and Finesse echoes this on that Peaker's Advantage podcast, and I agree with him. I would say Ricky also seemed to perform pretty well, usually. I would say Ricky and Ethan, to me, were kind of the most consistent players on the team, and certainly Kusta could be a really good player at times, so those were the focal points of the team, and Finesse and Cutler was kind of more the support system, I guess you could say. Finesse from an in-game leading perspective, trying to set up players, and then Cutler obviously just kind of, taking odd roles, playing, peripheral role positions and stuff, different things like that. So certainly inconsistency in performances, role conflicts between players, all these were issues. And then apparently the unwillingness to invest from CLG. Maybe they were already getting out the water of CSGO already and weren't willing to take a plunge back in. So Finesse talks about how he wanted to make lineup changes at times. He mentioned one change he'd like to see is removing Cutler for a more impactful rifler and maybe getting rid of Kusta and either making Ricky an opper and getting another rifler, or using Ricky as a rifler with Ethan to try to set up plays and then picking up another op like Yell or something like that. But the money just wasn't there to make those kinds of moves. And at that point, CLG is just doomed, in my opinion. Like, if the team's not working and you're not willing to invest money to buy better players that could make the team better, then you are just stuck in a black hole of nothingness, basically. Like, you're never going to be relevant anymore internationally, and you're going to start slipping in the NA scene. That's exactly what happened. And so that basically is the death of CLG and CSGO, and now it's just about what's next for these players is really the next question to ask, and this will be what ends the video. First and foremost, the three players that remained together were Cutler, Kuster, and Ethan playing in the CyberPower PC tournament with Rix, who was formerly of Ghost Gaming, used to play on Conquest and Tempo Storm and other teams in the NA scene, and then Exotic, who's a young, I think 16-year-old player who was on CLG Academy. And they actually made it to the finals of this event. I think they beat Splice 2-0. Both those games were in OT, those victories, and then I can't remember who they beat. I'm trying to remember who they beat in the quarterfinals. I'm not 100% sure, because I know that Splice beat Gale Force to play this team in the semifinals on the bottom side of the bracket, but can't quite remember who. I think it was GX, actually, the team with like Whitmer, Swag, AZK, Dapper, and Poyo. I think that was, yeah, that's what it was. Okay, so okay run, I guess you could say. They obviously got battered by Cloud9 in the finals, but that was to be expected. Have no idea if this team is meant to stick together or not. Certainly, if I'm Ethan, I would be exploring options if I were him, because he's a young guy, strong rifler, probably an attractive candidate for many teams out there. Exotic even is a young player who looked pretty good in this tournament, and at his age, he might be, wanting to explore his options also as far as trying with different teams and things like that. I guess it just depends on what other org is dipping out of NA CSGO that might be like a middle of the pack or lower tier team that would normally be interested in some of these players. It just really depends. Or maybe they could stick together. Who knows? I'm not sure how far this roster would really go. Apparently, Kusta was in-game leading and giving up opping, and Exotic was doing the opping. And then Cutler was, I guess, kind of helping Kusta with in-game leading. But honestly, I couldn't really see this team doing a whole lot in the NA scene, if I'm 100% honest. Like, yeah, Ethan's pretty good. Maybe this Exotic guy develops and becomes pretty good, and those two guys can be kind of your star players that you build around. And maybe Kusta rifling could be okay, but I have no idea if in-game leading long-term would be anything that he'd actually be truly capable of, and it would actually do this team any good. Cutler, to me, I just feel like if he's not going to be in-game leading, which he had done in the past for CLG, I'm not sure what value he really brings to a lot of NA teams these days with his dip in form. So I don't know what the future of that team would really be if it sticks together. I personally don't think it's that great, but we'll see. Going back through the players individually, though, then, for Finesse, certainly an IGL that could still have some value as an in-game leader or perhaps as a coach for some teams. I think those are some options he could be looking at if he wants to stay in CSGO. For example, if Daps truly doesn't want to play, as he kind of mentioned was the case with Energy whenever he did kind of step down and Fugly took over and they picked up Rico, if that's true that Daps is still kind of not really wanting to play, I could certainly see Finesse joining Energy and Daps going back to coaching. I could see that move happening unless Daps does just want to play. If that's the case, then it probably wouldn't happen. But there is a possibility of that. I know Finesse has a lot of respect for Cirque, for example, that's on the team. Spoke very highly of him, and Cirque is a pretty good player. So I could see that being a possibility. I could also see Finesse joining Optic. And I know that sounds a little bit far-fetched, but when you consider the fact that one of Optic's main issues could, in fact, be in-game leadership, there could be some shuffling around to get an in-game leader into the team. I know people have brought up Stanislaw. Maybe that's also possible. But I think Finesse is a possible candidate here, especially when you consider the fact that him and Chet seem to work really well together on CLG, seem to think highly of each other from listening to them talk with one another in the Peaker's Advantage podcast. And maybe in 2018, obviously Optic has some lands they have to play the end off this year and going into next year. But I could certainly see Finesse maybe being an option. You also have to consider what is Immortals up to. They are dropping people left and right, people going to different teams. Zach's already departed as well. That was coaching the Immortals organization. They do have a spot in Pro League still, I think. I think the org does own the spot. I don't know if they'll give it to players or what they'll do. But if they're just building a whole new team, for example, and you have people sitting out there like Finesse, like Ricky, like Ethan, maybe some other players you might be able to pick up. Maybe there's some potential there too. No idea what Immortals' plans are. But just saying, maybe you could see something crazy like that happening. I'm sure other lower tier teams would even be interested if they're sticking in CSGO, like in Complexity or like something like that. I don't even know if Finesse would be interested in those teams or what their futures look like anyway. And again, coaching is always an option for Finesse as well for different North American teams and maybe even beyond that. Who knows? So that's just some thoughts about maybe Finesse's future. As far as Ricky goes, he did mention he was willing to play in EU or NA. Honestly, in EU, I don't know what teams you could really join because obviously it'd have to be some type of multinational English-speaking team. No team that speaks another language is probably going to speak English just to pick him up. So the only teams that really come to mind are like Mouse Sports and Hellraisers. And I just I don't really know why Mouse would pick him up, and Hellraisers, I have no idea if he'd even be interested or what could happen there. But those are just some European options that might be willing to do it because they speak English and they're multinational. As far as NA teams go, he could be an upgrade in the opping department for several teams in the middle of the pack or lower ranked NA teams. Also, decent rifler for an opper as well. Has proven he can just do a main rifling role. So, I mean, he could be an attractive candidate to some NA teams for sure. I know some people mentioned Team Liquid. I guess I could see that. If JDM continues to struggle, the fact that Ricky is an opper and maybe could be a little bit better informed than JDM, and he also isn't going to have that same rifling handicap that JDM has had throughout his career. But they just made a big change picking up Steel, and I feel like they want to see how that's going to work first before they would make any other changes. But I'm just saying that it wouldn't be crazy out of left field if you saw that happen, but I doubt it. And really, I don't. I know some people said Cloud9 randomly, but there's no way they're making any changes right now. That so far their trajectory is still looking really good, and I wouldn't see why they would need to rattle that. And then again, I kind of mentioned Immortals because, you know, of their situation right now, what they're thinking of. Maybe Ricky and Finesse are both options for Immortals, depending on what they're planning on doing with their players. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think Ricky could certainly find himself in the NA scene, and I hope he does, because he seems like he could bring value. Ethan's the exact same way. He's a solid young rifler that should be seen as a pretty good commodity for most North American teams. Again, even though he's really solid, I'm sure he's not really going to be able to find himself on a team like a Team Liquid or a Cloud9 right now. There's just no need on those teams for a player like him with who they already have. Unless like Steel takes over in-game leading for Liquid and they want a strong rifler, then maybe Ethan's an option. But no real option for him on Cloud9, I wouldn't think. And so for him, it would be other middle-of-the-pack NA teams like Energy, like Misfits. Maybe some of these teams would be interested in him. Obviously, some of the lower-tier NA teams would certainly be interested in him, but would he even want to play for them? Hard to know. Hard to know. But I certainly think that he is a young rifler that is valuable and should be certainly be getting some types of offers. And I've kind of run through most of that then. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, please follow, subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.